There are defences, so they could deny receiving the notice. You have to prove that that notice was served. They could deny that there's been a nuisance. So yes, my dogs have barked, but it hasn't barked such that it is a statutory nuisance. Or they can argue there's a reasonable excuse. So for example, my neighbour has caused the dog to bark. They've been banging on the fence to encourage the dog to bark. It may well be, if that's indeed the fact of it, and the court accepts that, then that would be a reasonable excuse. But walking up and down on the boundary, that may well not be a reasonable excuse. Something else people say to me quite frequently is, well, they must have a dog whistle. Well, they might have a dog whistle, but it could just be that your dogs are barking. For business premises, they have an additional offence under section 80, subsection 7, if they can show that the best practical means were used to prevent or to counteract the effects of the nuisance. There are, of course, other methods of enforcement available. In theory, the complainant could bring their own proceedings either in the magistrates' courts or in the county courts, but really, why should they when there's obligations on the council? Taking your own proceedings can be expensive. If the person who has the barking dog lives in social housing, you could perhaps ask the landlord to invoke their covenants. They'll have covenants of quiet enjoyment. Perhaps that's another way, rather than the council prosecuting, perhaps the landlord could be encouraged to look at their covenants and consider taking their own proceedings there. Now, if the nuisance takes place during night hours, and the councils adopted the Noise Act 1996, then some councils take the view that the dogs can be removed. I don't agree. The Act does allow the seizure and removal, but only of equipment that's used in the emission of noise. I don't take the view that a dog can be classified as equipment. Another possible way forward, and something else to think about when you look at your enforcement toolkit, is an ASBO under the Crime and Disorder Act 1998. You need to prove that the noise was causing harassment, alarm or distress. But if you can, an ASBO does crank up the seriousness. Torridge District Council recently obtained an ASBO at North Devon Magistrates Court, partially on the grounds that the defendant's dogs were barking excessively. The defendant had 62 dogs, and under the terms of the ASBO, she was told that she couldn't own more than 6 dogs for the next 5 years. Now, the council in that case had already prosecuted her for breaching a noise abatement notice, and she'd been fined £2,000. So it may well be they took the view, let's try something else to resolve this problem. It may well be, though, that it's the draconian penalties that particularly encourage the council to go that route, because breach of an ASBO can include custody of up to 5 years for breach, as opposed to breaching the noise abatement notice, for which the penalty maximum is up to a £5,000 fine in ordinary residential circumstances. Okay, that's all I'm going to say to you about noise nuisance as well. It's extraordinary how quick I can get through this without a live audience. It's a bit odd, it's felt extremely artificial, so sorry about that. I hope it makes up in some small measure for me not talking about these things to you live. We would then have gone into a discussion about status dogs. Can't possibly recreate that just with my little camera up there. But what most of the other groups tended to do there was the group started from a position that it was certain types of dog and certain types of owner. But once we'd gone through the discussion and looked at your existing enforcement options available to you, it was generally held that status dogs just mean nuisance dogs held by irresponsible dog owners. And we already have quite a lot of laws that deal with nuisance dog situations. So we've got, if it's specific dogs concerned, we do already have breed-specific legislation that outlaws certain types of dog, and I went through that with you under the Dangerous Dogs Act. May well be that though that's changed at some stage, could be reduced, could be extended, could be abolished, who knows. We've already got that as part of your enforcement toolkit, certainly at the moment. So if the problem with these nuisance dogs for you in your area is in relation to a specific type of dog, we already have a law that deals with that. If the dog is acting in a dangerous fashion, such that somebody reasonably fears injury, then the Dangerous Dogs Act Section 3, non-aggravated, applies in those circumstances. If the dog is being used to go for other dogs, for example, the Dogs Act 1871 already applies to those kinds of situations, provided you've got sufficient evidence to prove that the dog is dangerous. But if you have, then even if it's solely dog on dog, we already have the law that deals with that. We've also got a situation where if the dog's being used basically as a menace, then if the council's adopted the dog control orders in its designated lands, then a requirement can be made for the dog to be put and kept on a lead. Maybe that would resolve it. We've also got the possibility of going down the ASBO route. If the dog is being used for antisocial behaviour, if it is causing harassment, alarm or distress, and there's a likelihood of it recurring. So what I was trying to get across in the discussion on status dogs is that we already have a lot of laws that deal with nuisance dogs. And we may well have even more, who knows what DEFRA are eventually going to decide to do. But what we haven't yet done, seems to me, and I'll just open this up for debate, we haven't quite got to grips with the other end of the lead, the person that's holding the dog's lead, the person, the owner, the person in charge of the dog. Because at the moment, there really aren't that many restrictions on who can own and who can have charge of a dog. And it may well be, if we analyse it sufficiently, that the real problem is the person rather than the dog itself. And that's the person because they want the dog to be menacing, the person because they don't know any better, or the person because they need education. Now, it's difficult to control ownership, and there can be some very harsh decisions that need to be taken at some stage by Parliament as to whether everybody should still have a right to have a dog. But that's something that could be legislated for if Parliament wanted it to, and in theory Parliament could make requirements on ownership. I mean, it could be that we only allow those who are fit and proper people to have charge of a dog to have them. We could make a requirement for dogs to be trained. That's possible. More difficult though on education of owners. I mean, I can see about training of dogs that can be required, albeit that could come at a cost. Do we want to make that more expensive for people to have ownership of dogs? Don't know. It's a matter for debate. Education is more tricky to legislate for, but in theory that could be done. You can make requirements to provide for the owners to be trained in how to look after dogs. But it seems to me that the emphasis needs to shift away from concerning ourselves with what the dogs are doing to putting controls on the owners to make sure that that's restricted before the dog does anything wrong or before anybody else is allowed to fear from those dogs. But I'm not the only person with a view on that, and you're probably shouting at me. I can almost hear you in annoyance and outrage at some of the nonsense I've just spoken. But that's fine. Status dogs are very much a matter for debate. No one, in my view, has necessarily got all of the answers. I found that an interesting part of the half day, and I am sorry that those of us who were there at Gatwick didn't have a chance to chat it through amongst ourselves. Now, I hope that's been helpful. You can now rewind this and play it all again, and there may well be a blooper reel to be shown at some stage. But thank you very much for your attention, and hopefully I'll look forward to seeing you on some other occasion. Thank you.